The Forum in Inglewood, California, September 14, 1979. The building held 20,312 people that night, and by 7:43 in the evening every seat had been taken. Standing room along the upper concourse had filled an hour before the doors were supposed to open. People had driven from San Diego, from Phoenix, from Las Vegas. Some had taken buses, a few had flown. The air inside smelled of concrete dust and sweat, and something older. The particular smell of a crowd that has come to see something they do not yet have words for. The occasion was the Professional Karate Association's annual exhibition tournament. 6 world-ranked fighters on the card. Network cameras on the floor. A production crew of 31 people moving between the staging area and the broadcast booth. The announcer had already read 3 names into the microphone, and each one had drawn a sound from the crowd that rolled through the building like a pressure wave. In the 4th row from the floor, on the aisle, a man sat in a folding chair with a paper cup of coffee and said nothing to the people around him. He wore a denim jacket over a gray shirt. He had a cap pulled forward so that the brim threw a shadow across the top half of his face. He was 39 years old. He was 5 feet 10 inches tall. He weighed 174 pounds. He had not competed in 3 years. Nobody was looking at him. On the other side of the building, in a corridor under the seating bowl, a different man was warming up. Jean-Claude Van Damme was 19 years old. He stood 6 feet and 1 inch tall and weighed 206 pounds, and not 1 pound of that weight was anything other than what he had put there through discipline and intention. He had been training since the age of 10. He held a black belt in Shotokan Karate awarded at 17. He had placed first in the European Karate Championship in Brussels the previous year. In the 4 months before this night he had fought 11 times and lost twice, and both losses had been close enough that the man who beat him would not have been comfortable discussing the margins in public. His kicks had been timed at a surface speed of 43.7 miles per hour. A sports physician in Brussels had measured his flexibility at the 99th percentile for males his age. He was not here to watch the card. He had come with a purpose. He had told his trainer 3 weeks before that he was going to introduce himself to the American market in a way that the American market would not be able to ignore. His trainer had asked him what he meant by that. Van Damme had said that there was a name that everyone in this building would know, and that if he stood across from that name, the name would transfer to him. That was the calculation. It was not a stupid calculation, it was simply incomplete. In the 3rd exchange of the 5th bout, a judoka from Seattle threw a sweeping hip toss that drove his opponent into the mat, with enough force that the sound carried up to the 3rd level of the building. The crowd noise dropped into the kind of silence that has texture. And from the 4th row, on the aisle, the man in the denim jacket set his coffee cup down on the concrete floor, very carefully, so that it did not make a sound. In exactly 6 seconds, 19-year-old Jean-Claude Van Damme was going to understand something about the difference between a man's reputation and a man's nature. He was going to learn it in front of 20,312 people. Nobody in the building knew what was about to happen. The bout concluded at 8:17. The fighters left the floor. The announcer carried his microphone to the center of the mat and began talking to fill the interval before the next bout. The production crew moved lighting rigs. A woman in the 7th row was telling the man next to her something that made him stop and look toward the floor. Van Damme came out of the corridor. He was wearing a competition gi white, with the Brussels tournament patch on the left breast. He moved through the floor-level crowd with the unhurried ease of someone who had already decided that the room belonged to him. He was 20 feet from the mat when a PICA official stepped toward him. A conversation took place. The official shook his head twice. Van Damme did not change direction. He stepped onto the mat. The announcer turned. The production crew stopped. In the broadcast booth, 3 rows above the floor, a man in headphones leaned forward and said something into a handset. The camera operator on the near side of the mat did not lower his camera. Van Damme reached for the announcer's microphone. He held it with the specific ease of someone who has rehearsed this moment. His voice carried clearly through the building's PA system, and it carried an accent that some people in the crowd would later describe as French, though it was Belgian. And the distinction mattered to him. He said that he had come to Los Angeles to find the best martial artist in America. He said that his name was Jean-Claude Van Damme, and that he was the European champion, and that he was willing to demonstrate what European karate looked like in front of anyone who wished to see it. He said there was one name in American karate that people spoke of as though the man were a legend, and he said the name, and he said that he was not certain a legend could be justified by what he had seen on film, and that the only way to know was to stand across from someone who had not been paid to fall down. The crowd sound was not uniform. It rose in some sections and dropped in others. The woman in the 7th row stopped talking. A tournament official moved toward Van Damme from the far side of the mat. He was 2 steps onto the floor when something in the building changed. It changed because of movement in the 4th row. The man in the denim jacket stood up. He did not stand quickly. He took the coffee cup from the floor and set it on the seat he had vacated. He removed the denim jacket. He folded it once lengthwise and placed it across the back of the chair. He removed the cap and set it on top of the jacket. Beneath the jacket he wore a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. He was not large. Standing among the people around him in the 4th row, he would not have been the person you looked at twice. He began to move toward the floor. The recognition did not begin in the 4th row. It began in the 3rd row. Then the 2nd row. Then it moved outward from both sides like something spreading through water when a stone has been dropped into the center of it. By the time the man in the gray shirt had reached the aisle, the sound had changed again, and Van Damme, still holding the microphone at the center of the mat, had turned to find the source of the change. He had already lost. He did not know it yet. If you want to see what happened in those next 6 seconds, make sure you are subscribed and drop a comment below telling us where you are watching from. There are people watching this from more than 40 countries, and we read every one. Chuck Norris came onto the mat without ceremony. He did not acknowledge the camera operator. He did not acknowledge the announcer. He did not acknowledge the crowd, which was now producing a sustained low sound that the boom operator in the broadcast booth would later say he had never heard a crowd produce for a single person walking across a floor. He stopped. He was 8 feet from Van Damme. He did not stretch. He did not roll his shoulders. He did not bounce on his feet or shake his hands loose. He stood in the particular stillness of a man who has already made every necessary decision and is simply waiting for events to confirm them. Van Damme lowered the microphone. His trainer, watching from the corridor entrance, would say afterward that this was the first moment he understood that something had gone wrong with the calculation. The CKA official who had been moving toward Van Damme had stopped. The tournament director, a man named Gerald Hendricks, who had been running professional karate events since 1971, was standing at the scorer's table with both palms flat on the surface. He did not move them. He would tell people about those 6 seconds for the next 30 years. Here is what a fight is not. A fight is not 2 trained men exchanging techniques until one of them fails. That is about. A fight is something smaller and more complete than that. A fight is a single question asked in a specific language, and the question is always the same question, and the language is distance. Every technique in every martial system is a dialect of that language. The man who controls the distance controls the conversation. The man who controls the conversation controls the answer. Chuck Norris had been studying that language for 22 years. Second one. Van Damme moved first. The kick was a front leg side kick, delivered with the hip rotated completely through, the heel extended. The weight of 206 pounds focused into a surface area roughly the size of a man's fist. It had been timed at 43.7 miles per hour. At 8 feet of distance, it had a travel time of approximately 0.14 seconds from initiation to full extension. It did not land. Norris moved backward. Not quickly, with a precision that looked, to people in the upper sections of the building, like nothing more than a slight shift in posture. He moved 3 inches. The kick passed through the space where his midsection had been, and Van Damme's weight carried forward, past center, past recovery, into a position that any man with 22 years of study would recognize as the specific position a person occupies for approximately 0.4 seconds when they have committed completely to a technique that has found nothing. Norris did not counter. He waited. In the broadcast booth, the man in headphones had set the handset down without ending the call. Second 2. Van Damme reset. His recovery was fast, genuinely fast, the kind of fast that justifies a ranking. That justifies traveling from Brussels to Los Angeles with a calculation about names and transfers. He came back to his guard in less than half a second. He changed the angle. The second technique was a spinning back kick, the movement that had won him the Brussels final, the movement his trainer had logged at 41 miles per hour, the movement that had ended 4 of his last 6 victories. He committed to it with his full weight, his full rotation, his full intention. The kick landed against open air. Norris had moved again, the same 3 inches, the same slight shift. He was now 6.5 feet away from Van Damme, standing at a 40-degree angle to the line Van Damme had expected him to occupy, and from that position there was a specific opening that every student of that language would have read in the same instant. Van Damme read it. Second 3, he threw a combination. Left jab, straight right, left hook. With a drop step to close the distance on the final movement, it was the correct combination for the position. It was the combination that a man with a black belt with a European championship with 11 fights in 4 months would throw from that angle against that opening. It was technically sound. Every person in the building with enough training to evaluate technique would have agreed that it was the right choice. All 3 strikes landed on nothing. In the 4th row, the seat where Norris had been sitting was occupied now by a woman who had moved into it from the row behind during the commotion. She was watching the mat with her hand pressed flat against the side of her face. Later she would tell a journalist from Black Belt magazine that she had understood what she was watching only at the moment of the 3rd missed combination, and that the understanding had arrived not as a thought but as something physical, something she felt in her chest. Gerald Hendricks at the scorer's table had not moved his palms from the surface. Second 4. Van Damme was breathing now in a way he had not been breathing when he walked onto the mat. The breathing was not from exertion. It was from the beginning of a particular kind of knowledge, the knowledge that the calculation had been based on the wrong information, that the man standing 8 feet away from him in a gray shirt was not the legend from the films, not the television actor, not the competition record from 3 years ago, that he was something that could not be prepared for using information that existed anywhere Van Damme had thought to look. He did not stop. He committed to a 4th technique. Second 5, the 4th technique was a jumping double kick. The move that had drawn the loudest response from the Brussels crowd. The move his trainer had told him he would need to stop throwing in competition because it was too specialized, too committed, too beautiful for the context of a professional fight. He threw it anyway. He threw it with the complete and specific commitment of a 19-year-old who has run out of the smaller options and has decided to answer a question he does not know how to ask with the loudest thing he possesses. Chuck Norris caught him, not the kick. He let the kick complete. He stepped inside the arc of the second impact, inside the distance where the kick had no power. And he wrapped one arm around Van Damme's landing leg, and the other hand came up and stopped. The palm of Chuck Norris's right hand stopped 1 inch from the left side of Jean-Claude Van Damme's jaw. It stopped there and held. The crowd did not make the rolling pressure wave sound. The crowd made no sound at all. Second 6. Norris held the position for 3 full seconds. Long enough for Van Damme to understand every dimension of what had happened. Long enough for every camera operator on the floor to have the frame they needed. Long enough for Gerald Hendricks to lift his palms from the scorer's table and place them slowly in his lap. Then Chuck Norris lowered his hand. He released Van Damme's leg. Van Damme came down to the mat and stood upright, and Norris took 1 step backward, returning the distance between them to 8 feet, the same distance from which this had all begun. He extended his right hand. Van Damme looked at the hand. The looking lasted 2 seconds. It was the fork in the road, visible to everyone in the building who was close enough to read a face, and later visible to everyone who watched the broadcast footage, and later still visible to everyone who heard the story told in dojos from Los Angeles to Brussels over the following 2 decades. The moment when a man decides what kind of story his defeat is going to become. Van Damme took the hand. He held it. He leaned forward. And Chuck Norris said something to him, quietly. Something that none of the 31 production crew members and none of the 20,312 people in the building could hear. A sentence. 6 words, according to the man who was standing closest to them, a stunt coordinator named Philip Tan who had been watching from the edge of the mat. 6 words that Van Damme would not repeat in public for 11 years, until a 1990 interview with a French sports magazine, in which he would say only that they had been the most useful 6 words anyone in martial arts had ever said to him, and that he thought about them before every performance he had given since. Norris let go of the hand. He turned. He walked back toward the 4th row. He retrieved the cap from the back of the chair and placed it on his head. He put on the denim jacket. He picked up the paper cup of coffee from the floor. He sat down. The recognition wave moved through the building again. This time it was accompanied by a sound, and the sound built until it was the kind of sound that buildings like the Forum are designed to contain but occasionally fail to. Norris did not acknowledge it. He drank his coffee. Van Damme stood at the center of the mat for a moment that some witnesses described as short and others described as long, and then he walked off the mat and back toward the corridor, and he did not look at the cameras, and he did not take the microphone again. Philip Tan would tell the story in every gym he worked in for the next 30 years. Gerald Hendricks included it in a self-published memoir in 2004, in a chapter he titled, The Question of Distance. A sports journalist named Richard Kamens filed a piece for a regional publication the following week. The piece did not run. His editor said it was not verifiable enough to print. The story spread anyway, the way such stories always spread. Through the specific underground of people who train, who teach, who have a reason to carry useful information and pass it to the next person who might need it. It spread without the journalist's article, without a broadcast segment, without documentation beyond the footage that the production crew did not include in that year's highlight reel. It spread because it was the kind of story that answers a question people are always quietly asking, which is whether the thing a man is said to be and the thing a man actually is can ever occupy the same body at the same time. Van Damme returned to Belgium 3 weeks later. He came back to Los Angeles in 1982, and he did not seek another introduction. He trained. He competed. He built something over the next decade that had nothing to do with the calculation he had brought to the Forum in 1979, and everything to do with the 6 words that he would not repeat until he was ready to say them in public, and only then to a magazine based in a country where most of the people in that building would never read them. Chuck Norris drove home on the 405. He was in bed before midnight. A man does not own a reputation. A reputation is a story other people have agreed to tell while waiting to find out if it is true. The only answer to that question is the one a man gives in the 8 feet between himself and whoever has come to ask it, with no audience in mind and no performance prepared, in the specific language of distance, on a night when 312 people came to see something they did not yet have words for, and went home with something they would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe. Next week we will talk about the night in 1983 when a decorated United States Navy SEAL walked into a training session on a base outside San Diego, believing that what he had been told about Chuck Norris was a thing that happened in controlled environments, and discovered something in the first 47 seconds that changed the way he taught hand-to-hand combat for the remainder of his career.